I'm going to let you finish. I really am. I just got to say that Volvo makes the greatest wagon of all time. It's a very nice microphone you got there. It'd be nice if you turned it on. Apparently that's not going to happen. We're back, and we're doing cabling wiring on this thing. As you can see, I've got no audio on the first part of that, and the audio on the rest of this thing sucks. I'm ruining YouTube. I really am. Fancy camera, we're shooting in 4K. This is a phone that we're on here, and we're improving things, in my opinion, because that sort of lost its spunk. That was the original thing of people's thoughts, of people's things, doing complete amateur. You're getting the real deal, the real boots on the ground, and what's happening, and it was real. Now, if I wanted heavily curated and edited content, I mean, NBC still exists, I guess, or Netflix, or actually, if you want to go to amateur hour, it's Netflix. Made for Netflix special. But, 1984 Volvo 240. Hold on. Let's... There. Vertical video. It's a thing for a different platform. Look at this gem. But the wiring on these things leaves something to be desired. First of all, I know it's not a look for everybody, and somebody on my roof. There we go. Something else will happen with this roof soon. We need to pull this headliner off, and apparently we need to reinforce the thing. That was just from wind. Unlike, typically kids crawl on it, and that's just making it weaker. Came in here to turn off the light. Your rollover protection is going to be in these pillars right here, which are, I mean, not the thing. I mean, there's several of them. I mean, this one's at an angle for additional strength. That up. Anyway, I'm getting off track. Ignore the bag of Cheetos. Seat upgrade. Heated seats. We are looking up wiring on these things. There you can get right in and see that. That's completely split. So, although it is split, I've got no rear license plate light, but what I do have is a working defroster. Kind of barely, but it works. There's also a wiper back here, which does not work. So it is over a year later, and the wiring that I did on this, the repairs that I did, are still here, still holding strong. I'm going to show you some few things. First of all, in the stock Volvo format, there is a junction block right here. There's no fusible link, there's no fuse or anything, and then that just splits off to like 4 different things. One of them is the ECU fuel pump and all that. But we put an actual fuse block in here because that power was going all the way back into the cabin without any protection in the areas where it was likely to need protection. So, wiring has been upgraded here. Here's the coil wire that's upgraded. Now, which one's positive, which one's negative? I think that's negative. Oh, that goes to the wire down there. Got to remember everything I did. And yeah, slightly messy. Could clean it up here. Big power wire that rolls around there. But new wires, new crimps, through and through. And corrected, because you don't want this thing to catch on fire. So it'd be nice if all your things worked. But down behind the alternator was the biggest issue. Most of this other cabling was at least tolerable. I did re-wire loom this. You're going to see this. But that is all new cabling going all the way across. Okay, what's happened there? What's that for? Okay, someone should probably look at that. Wouldn't be a ground on the alternator. We got to be honest with ourselves in our own shortcomings, I guess. But new cabling up into here, you can see where that's sort of coming apart there. That one wasn't redone. I think that was re-crimped on there. But over here, there's this temporary patch job, and this is what you're going to see the majority of that other cabling look like, just like this. Obviously, that's not going to work. The big wires go underneath the water pump. I believe it's under the crank pulley. It comes up on the other side, and I chose to retain the original setup instead of going around the motor this way or anything, which there was options. Choices could have been made. So let's get into it. I made a point about how terrible YouTube was a little bit ago, and same opinion, this video and the first half of it not having any audio, basically just the intro, is sort of what really discouraged me to not do YouTube anymore. And then started playing around with this other Chinese platform, and it became fun again. Making video content was fun. But we got to follow the money, so now we're back here. But I refuse to do it like we were doing before. Let's get into this. The wiring. I assume I have a tidy ending of things that make sense, and I wrapped it all together, and I talked about tools and cabling and whatnot. So, carry on, and do those things that you do, like the commenting, the subscribing, and all that stuff. It's been over a year since I made the first part of this, and I'm not sure what's in this, but maybe I'll record some, I don't know, we'll try to be whatever. I don't know what's on the video that I recorded well over a year ago, but we'll find out. So the wiring on these things, some say it's because they use biodegradable cabling or something. I don't know how true that is. They've said the same thing about the Toyota Tundra. It too had wiring issues, much newer, or soy cabling, and the mice love it. That's not the case this. It's just cabling that can't handle the heat cycles, and also, this thing's like 40 years old. So, there's going to be cabling issues. There's some very good gearheads that can rebuild like a small block Chevy just for memory alone. But they say their weakness is electricity. They can't handle the wiring on things. And I've seen some of their work. There's like light switches on the dash and stuff. Unless you're running an old diesel. In fact, anything. Even if you're running an old diesel, you still got lights. You still got other management and whatever. So you still have to do the wiring. You have to know the wiring. So there's no way around it. You're going to have to learn how to do this. And you're going to have to do it right. Otherwise, things go awry. So I guess let's start way back here. The battery. Of course, of the most skookum variety, cheap battery. These things, as you can see by the one dated 3/21 right there, you're only gonna get a little over a year out of them. But for the price, 60 bucks now? Yeah, inflation, you know. It's not too bad. So, the battery. We'll start back here. And actually the battery is not where your electrical problems are gonna start on most of these. Worked on a number of them, and the battery wiring, pretty skookum. Not much to go wrong here. Now, this clip was recorded after the fact, so you're gonna see the repair, but it's been running for about a year and a half, as I pointed out in that earlier clip there. Now, coming right off the battery, we'll start with the ground here. This I believe to be the factory ground. Looks original here, not an aftermarket one like that that's been replaced. So you run to the body right here, and this, the big blue wire, goes right down to the block. On most of these are not the problematic wires. And if you need to redo one of these, they sell a complete thing. You can get a terminal like this, you can buy bare wire. In fact, they sell battery wires, 2 ones, just at the parts store. That's gonna be almost a direct fit. Maybe you have to crimp on a lug, and then the big power wires. So this is going to run some of your accessories inside. I believe it goes to computer and etc. Comes off of this block right here. Now this block is nothing but a cheap little, they're like $15, a 6-gang boat automotive thing. They do come with a cover, but I got rid of that. Main powering your cabin. This other fatty positive wire runs directly to your starter, which, you know, it's much easier to see when you have this all torn apart. Starter back of the motor. Then that runs actually forward underneath the motor and goes to your alternator. There's your power lead for your alternator. Make sure to link those two, I guess. So the problematic areas are going to be the harness that goes underneath the motor. One, it gets a lot of oil and stuff on it, and then it gets hot, gets cold, it's exposed to all the debris of the road, and etc. So wires that are going to crisscross and go under the motor. Wires for your coil, and they all run to the passenger ignition control module. Now, some words about this ignition control module. They are sort of an Achilles heel. This model, I believe, this is an 84, and when did they switch to this guy? I think in 88 or 89, you actually have your ignition control in the ECU, if I'm thinking right. But these guys, ignition control module, Volvo reinvented the wheel on this. If you look at your Dizzy and your distributor there, there's a little Hall effect sensor in there. There's 3 wires that run from that distributor over to here, and then 2 that run back to the coil. So, a bunch of wires, and then of course this gets power elsewhere. This is your coil signal wire right here, which as you can see I ran all on its own because it is a pretty skookum wire. It's 2 wires here. One of them is a shielding. It's kind of an odd setup, I believe, but See that running to the negative over there. And that one actually did not need to be replaced. So we just put it in a new harness and ran her over. But on the alternator, there are essentially 2 wires. It grounds to the case. So you got your big power wire here. That one goes to the starter back there underneath the motor, and then you have your accessory, or basically your trigger on. So that's going to run, where's that run to? There's your key on exciter wire. So these ignition control modules clearly says Volvo USA, but there's rumors around that this is actually a Chrysler unit. But everyone calls it the Chrysler unit, but I have yet to see what Chrysler vehicle this came off of, because these are they're not really unobtainium. People sell them on eBay refurbished units for about $350 if you could find it. And that is expensive for one of these things. There's a separate video with the teardown, or maybe that's a future video of a teardown of one of these where we failed to fix one. But this thing also runs your ignition advance. I know, it's madness. That's why there's 3 wires coming from that distributor here. One is the Hall effect sensor, and there's 2 to actually turn it internally to advance your timing. But why do that? I don't understand why Volvo did some of the things that they did. This does your advance, but does it based off of speed. So it's not doing anything fancier that a vacuum unit can't do, but who might have questioned them, I guess. So a bunch of wires run underneath the motor. I chose to keep the original runnings. Now it is possible to remove it. You know, a decision was made at the time to run it. This thing also needs vacuum. What looks like the side of your distributor for vacuum advance is right down there. So it takes the vacuum signal, it reads vacuum, it knows speed, it knows time, and then it decides how to vacuum it instead of running the vacuum directly to the distributor like you'd have on a conventional vacuum advanced distributor. So why they chose to do that and make this more complicated, I don't know. But the repair on these is not too complicated, says the guy who never got one to work. But one could, well, you've got options. There is just a whole bunch of space under here to work. You could run your wires back, you get a rat's nest or whatever, you'd probably wire it nicely and have a nice loom and everything. You could wire it in the front, you can have a little section right here, through there. There's plenty of space to work. I remember this, fog lights. So there's a switch there and then it goes back up to the front. You can see her running right here. But I would 100% recommend replacing the brittle, and they're just spade connectors on the old unit, so easy enough to switch out to these. Recommend replacing that brittle unit. That one is unfused. All these power wires, these guys go right into the cab, and it's a questionable harness, goes right in, completely unprotected. There's no fuse or anything on them. So this is a welcome upgrade that I would recommend. About these. Now these are completely serviceable and not yet breaking apart. The rubber on these is extremely hard, so that's, you know, that's gonna happen with heat cycles. The fuel injector is sort of an odd setup. You can see they run down underneath the intake, they group up because it fires all the injectors at the same time, and then they run back. I think they connect in, I would assume they connect into one. Luckily that harness, which is complex, you can see right here, going back to the ECU, is still intact and the wires are still good in there. No reason to address those. The main thing is going to be the harness under there. And there is another hard, because all this plastic hardens over time, wire loom that runs to the starter. Then as far as where to get your wiring, we're at the usual suspects. The orange one, as you can see, it's going to cost you. You definitely want stranded, not solid, that'll break off. Super pricey, as you can see, but for those bigger, like those alternator leads, you need a thicker wire. They got it in a number of colors, and if you do want to do it to length, I always have extra cabling lying around. Natural consequence of being in this line of work. Another one. I got terminal blocks here, whatever. Oh, crimp sleeves. Do not bother with this junk. Now we're over in the day. Do they even have a good crimper here? We do have the official Klein Precision flush cutters, and you're definitely going to be needing them. Wiring simplified. Well, can't believe 20 bucks for this, but luckily, Harbor Freight has you figured out. The Bauer has a Klein knockoff. I mean, we're getting closer, but not quite. There we go. The Klein crimper right there. And that one They even stole the color, those Harbor Freight people. But for half the price. No, well, on the price, $20. And we really are at the usual suspects. Now, for stripping, there is a tool for that for $10. I just use the flush cuts, which these are not. And they should sell the flush cuts in the electrical, but they do not. But as far as your terminal sets, you tell me for $10 you got it all here? That'll do it. Or for $5.99 your connectors here. But down here on the bottom, they do have an assortment set with a handy organizer. Well, that might be worth it just for the organizer. Fortunately, it only goes down to 12 gauge for the ring terminal, which is not quite big enough for us. Well, for your bigger cables, 2 gauge. Not the same spot. It's 2 gauge, but even bigger terminals than those. But hey, the price. Now this is what you need for those big wires. You might be able to get this as a rental. That is hard to swallow. What's a person to do? These are the way. As you can see, it looks just like those Kleins. Now, was it accurate earlier? It is a Doyle, not a Bauer, but for $20. That's, last I knew, cheaper than, what was that, 34, 35? But does the job, does well, almost. Well, the flush cuts are also almost an exact copy of the Kleins as well. So, intellectual property means nothing to China. So I'm going to return this conversation to previous me. Take it away. Of course, you aren't limited to new wire. My choice of wire is the telecommunications garbage scrap wire pulled out from decommissioned equipment or upgrades, replacements, whatever. So here we got decent stuff. Oh, we're going down to 4 gauge. Now, the easy way to do this work is with most everything in the front removed. We've removed our fan, we've removed our radiator shroud, all of it gone. It's convenient time to do a timing belt as well. We might as well toss some new belts in here as well. Well, look at all this space we have to work with. Now, before even touching anything, looking at that loom there, this cabling's completely falling apart. The loom itself is split or just missing in some spaces, and the wiring isn't much better. I'm actually surprised this thing hasn't caught fire already. Alternator does spin freely, so we got that going for us. In fact, a year later, we still got the same alternator, so apparently it's just fine. Now, we don't need to remove the alternator for this, but loosening it and pulling it to max extension gives you a better grasp on those wires that go up behind it and under it. Now we're going to get a view of exactly how bad things are here. And amazing. There's a number of wires here that are completely disintegrated. Like I said, I'm not sure how this didn't catch fire ever. The power on wire, the loom itself is split or just missing in some spaces, and the wiring isn't much better. Now let's fish this wire through. Yeah, the decision to route the wire underneath the crank, behind the pulley, underneath the timing belt, it is dirty and it is gross. And here you can see exactly how bad that is and how many wires we've just lost here. Incredible. They're pulling up, and it's a greasy job, hence being under the pulley. Now, this doesn't really leak any oil, but still, just the positioning, she's going to get greasy. As you can see, this runs under the motor, then behind the distributor. Normally, let's say we're pushing rope, however, with how stiff this harness is, very possible. So behind the distributor, underneath the intake, completely around, there's a stop at the starter for it to, the alternator's charge wire. Pulling off the airflow sensor tube, accessibility here. But, you know, maybe the routing makes a little bit more sense when you realize that, let me get down in there, that alternator wire goes over to the starter. Started an alternator together. Interesting. But it didn't need to go that way, I guess. I mean, just a weird routing to go across the front of the motor, right next to a whole bunch of spinny boys, behind the distributor, underneath the intake, and then right out there. And then before it rejoins the larger grooming and comes into here. So, just a weird setup. So I think what I'm going to do... Actually, no, I don't want to cut it if I don't have to. Maybe it can still run to the starter. Let's see if we can pull some wire loom off. We're using these guys. I believe these are gems. Now, you want to not cut yourself, nor your cables. Oh, look at that. Oh yeah, that is the way. The razor, absolutely the way to go. I had to keep things kind of in order here. Fatty wires, and there are 2 of them. There's enough oil inside of that wire loom that I'm tossing an oil pan down there. And we're making progress, as you can see. And this stuff is tough to show you, but you can probably see that oil. But let's drain the oil. Oil change. Okay, we're gonna do these one by one. So looking at this wire, our fatty here. Pull her out. Big chunk of wire is gone. And there's this business. Alternator. This guy. Rosie. So IPD Direct also sells a kit that do that. They want like $45 for the kit, and it's the wires that go under the alternator and just a little pigtail that you plug in. I'm just like, I'm not paying $45 for a few sets of wires. But then I get this apart and I look here, and it's like, what in the world's going on here? So there's sort of this clump here. So you're confused. I'm confused, bro. I mean, this looks like shielding for a ground to reduce noise. I mean, this is the braking side. So why do it? Wouldn't it just be easier just to put your coil right next to your ignition control module if you're having a bolt under the hood? I mean, Volvo confuses me sometimes. You're confused, I'm confused. We're gonna go without it and see what happens, I guess. I mean, we've got quality wire, should be good. We're gonna find out. We're gonna find out. So, no regrets. Regrets, many of them. So, a new plan. We're going to reuse as much of the original wire as we can. Actually, is going to take the original routing. I was looking to rerun the power cable. However, I would need to go a little bit further, because this power cable from the alternator runs from the alternator to the starter, and then the starter has a big cable going to the battery. I would prefer to run the alternator directly to the battery. Why they chose to do it that way, I don't know. But in my power cable, I mean, what's that? 4 gauge? Yeah, 4. I've got, what's that, 6 or 8. There's a lot of insulation. It's going to say right on it somewhere. Yeah, whatever it is. It's much thinner than that. So it can either go under, which you never want to do, or it could go way overkill. There's actually, the wiring isn't as bad as I previously thought. So what I think I'm going to be able to do is to come in here and replace the affected wires, like this guy here, get the ones off the starter. It's going to be hard to see, and just splice in a new section of wire, and then I think we're going to be mostly good. Well, the wire we're choosing to do this is way overkill, and not the right color. There's black, there's red. 12 gauge. And that's the wire that we're placing here. This stuff is like a 16 and flimsy, but this stuff's going to be a big improvement. clean my hands off. And you gotta have the proper tool for this. There are those that say just pliers or whatever, but there is a tool specifically designed for this. Look, it's color-coded even. And it doesn't release until you've fully compressed it. And there we have a perfect connection. Look, the two. I don't know if you guys have had issues like I have, that when you just try to use pliers or the improper tools, that you do not get a good connection. And yes, I know, I am getting my brand new cables here dirty, but since they're going in the engine bay, around the alternator and everything, I don't think that's an issue. Nice and snug. Now the extremely fun part of putting it in the loom. Is there a... I always forget them, but I keep on seeing life hack tricks come up that show you how to do this better but... Running 3 different looms. This is going to have its own protection. The alternator is going to have its own little setup. This has nothing to do with me buying the smallest wire loom that I could find. But it should be good for this, right? We should be fine. And this stuff isn't cheap. Recommendation. I had this in our Toyota van when I wanted some electronics in the back. It is a sub back there. And also there's a trailer, so I wanted to run auxiliary power from the front all the way to the back. Is that instead of using Telco Flex all the way back, PVC conduit. Mine was just waste from work. It was like 5 foot of it. It was like for small fiber work. So used some of that, made couplers at the end, made holes at the end, and that, sturdy and straight. When you have the space and can do that, and this is PVC, this is like 1/2 inch, so pretty thin, and it's easy to go around bends and stuff, so it doesn't need to be perfectly straight. Now, understandably, going underneath a van, front to back, that there's a lot of, I don't say open space. Yeah, there's a lot of open space, more than you might have in a car or anything. So it may not be a perfect option for everyone, but the option I liked, that wiring is safe, snug, and secure to this day. So aside from those ones here, which I've reran, everything else looked alright. And this wire loom, coming from the ignition control module here, is simply wrapped with electrical tape. It didn't have a special loom all of its own. So we are going to follow that in just the same. You add a quality tape when you do this. Some good to 600 volts and a couple hundred degrees or whatever. You're going to want a quality one so you don't end up in a bad situation. Melty stuff. Don't get that dollar store Walmart junk. And you see, I use the good stuff. It is a bit thicker. It's all about the girth than the stuff you'd get, say, at Walmart or shoot, even the parts store. This is a Platt Electric special here. Now let's manage this mess all together. And there's a little clip here that rolls around them. I have great respect for automotive YouTubers. Even in an engine bay that's this open and this wide, it's still not easy to get good angles in here. Just sneaks in between the timing belt cover. The thing we really got to do is make sure that it can't get to the rub against the crank pulley. Hello there. It is the end of this video, and I needed to record a bumper to go on the end to conclude things, I guess. But the wiring situation, if you own an 81, I forget the last year, 88, within that time frame, mid-80s Volvo, this is something you're going to need to do. I'm actually surprised there's not more reports of these things catching fire. You'd think they'd be known like the Pinto around here, given how bad that wiring was and how, I mean, in the engine bay, but, worst case, it melts a wire, I guess. Maybe different than the Pinto. But if you want a reliable Volvo, this is certainly something you need to do. If you want one that runs, it's definitely something you need to do. So, later, and some 10,000 miles later, everything here is fine. I have not dinked with the wiring under here since I made that video, other than they had a fog light. One of them got broken off, unfortunately. But a year later, no breakdowns due to wiring, no weird electrical issue, and 0 fire. So this is something you could do yourself. It does take some time. It is a bit tedious. If you are a bit shy about making your own, IPD does have that harness that will go right under the motor that you just splice in for, what was it, 42, 43 bucks? That might be worth it to you. But I'm cheap. Very cheap. And actually, with that harness, you're probably saving money with what you'd spend on wire anyway. I mean, my wire was free, so that's different. But, thanks for watching. Do those YouTube things that you guys usually do. All right, it's really coming down on me. Yeah, those YouTube things. If you comment, make your complaints below, subscribe, because there's more coming. The next one is we're doing a real lift on this, not a Jeep spring lift, not a spacer, or what is a spacer, not a rubber spacer parts store lift, but a real lift on the thing. And then we're going to do the front too. So we got more exciting Volvo content coming up, and also there's a few other things in the works. So do your thing.